The idea wasn't mine. It belonged to Trevor, though he got it from some vague acquaintance whose name I never caught. As soon as he mentioned a hidden lake, tucked far into the woods and untouched by crowds, Alex's eyes lit up. He insisted we had to see it, that it would be the perfect escape. I wasn't keen on camping, I never had been, but the thought of slipping out of the choking rhythm of the city for a weekend was enough to convince me. No deadlines, no horns blaring, no endless buzzing of phones. Just silence, just space. By the time we finally found the place, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. For hours we had stumbled along winding trails that seemed to lead nowhere until suddenly, there it was, the lake. It opened before us without warning, vast and unmoving, a glassy surface reflecting the fiery streaks of sunset. For a moment, it didn't seem real. The water mirrored everything with perfect clarity, as though it were holding its breath. And the forest, tall and dense, crowded around the edges like a wall of shadow. Something about the stillness unsettled me, though I couldn't say why. We set our tents right at the shoreline. Trevor, always restless, got the fire started, and soon sparks spiraled upward into the cooling air. The flames painted our faces in shifting golds and oranges. Alex pulled out the food and drinks, and we laughed harder than we had in months. The city felt far away, reduced to nothing more than a faint memory. For a while, it was easy to believe this trip had been worth it. But that illusion cracked after midnight. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers. The forest hummed softly with life frogs croaking, crickets buzzing, an owl calling from somewhere unseen. My eyes had just started to close when it came. A scream. It split the night like a blade. Sharp, piercing, human. I bolted upright, heart hammering in my chest. Alex and Trevor were already awake, staring wide-eyed at each other. "What the hell was that?" Alex whispered. His voice shook. The sound had come from across the lake. We scrambled to the tent flaps and shoved our flashlights into the dark. The beams only reached so far before they were swallowed by blackness. Across the water, the trees stood motionless and silent. Then it came again. Louder. Closer. A scream of such raw agony that my stomach clenched. "Maybe someone's hurt," Trevor muttered. He was already fumbling for his boots, ready to go. But something about the sound was wrong. The pitch was jagged, stretched unnaturally, carrying something underneath it that didn't sound human at all. "No," I said sharply. "We wait until morning." Trevor glared at me, his face caught between anger and fear. But before we could argue, the scream ripped through the night once more. This time, it wasn't across the lake. It was here, on our side. I froze. No splashes, no movement across the water, nothing to suggest someone had crossed at all. But the scream had shifted. Closer. Too close. We retreated into our tents, fumbling with zippers and flashlights, clinging to the idea that it had to be an animal, or a trick of distance, or maybe the alcohol still swirling in our blood. But then came something undeniable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, splashes of water in the shallows near our camp. The sound of something dragging its feet through wet mud, circling. My skin prickled. None of us moved. None of us even breathed. Then the steps stopped, right outside my tent. The fabric pushed inward slightly, as though someone or something were leaning against it. I held my breath. A faint sound filled my ears. Breathing, steady, human, inches away. Alex finally cracked, his voice breaking as he shouted, "Who's out there?" The night went dead quiet, no reply. And then, a scrape, a slow drag down the length of my tent, like a fingertip tracing the nylon from top to bottom. My blood iced over. With trembling hands, I flicked on my flashlight, fumbling at the zipper until I finally yanked it open. The beam cut into the darkness. Nothing. The shoreline was empty. The water was perfectly still, a flawless mirror, not a ripple, not a footprint in the mud. It was as if nothing had ever been there at all. We didn't sleep. Not after that. The three of us sat in a tight circle, backs pressed together, flashlights clutched like weapons. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, sent waves of panic through us. The night dragged on unbearably slow until, at last, the sun edged over the treetops and painted the lake in gold. Daylight made the memory fragile, like something half-dreamed. We laughed nervously, tried to brush it off as the tricks of exhaustion. But as I tore down my tent, my breath froze. There were streaks of mud smeared across the fabric, long, deliberate marks, not random splatters, not the work of rain or an animal. Parallel lines, dragged downward as if by dripping hands. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Trevor and Alex saw my face, followed my gaze, and their laughter died instantly. Their expressions drained pale. We packed in silence. No jokes, no arguments. Just the sound of our hurried footsteps pounding the trail until the lake was far behind us. That was 2 years ago. None of us has camped since. Trevor won't even talk about it. Alex blocks out any mention of lakes or forests. And me? I can't forget. I still hear it sometimes late at night, when the rain beats against my window or waves slap against the shore. That scream, shredded and wrong, echoing through the dark. And every time I hear it, I wonder the same thing. If we had stayed another night, would we have been the ones screaming too? Camping alone had always been my escape. There was something primal about it, no chatter, no buzzing phones, no one to answer to. Just the wilderness pressing in on all sides, and the silence that becomes absolute once the sun disappears. Last autumn, I set out into the mountains for a weekend cut off from the world. No service. No trails, no people. I wanted solitude. What I got instead was the most horrifying night I've ever endured. By the time my tent was staked down, the light was nearly gone. The forest darkened faster than I'd imagined, shadows twisting into long, crooked shapes as the last scraps of sun bled away. The air smelled of damp pine and cold soil, and somewhere nearby a creek murmured softly through the trees. I scavenged enough branches for a fire, and soon the flames snapped and hissed, their warmth chasing back the chill that had begun to settle in. Dinner was simple canned beans heated over the fire, and a piece of bread I'd wrapped in foil. I sat against a fallen log, chewing slowly, watching the glow of the flames stretch and shiver across the fabric of my tent. For a while, it felt exactly as I'd hoped, pure, untouched quiet, the kind that makes the rest of life feel distant and irrelevant. Just me, the fire, and the endless dark forest surrounding it all. That peace shattered around midnight. At first, it was faint, a crunch of leaves somewhere beyond the fire's reach. I froze, the spoon halfway to my mouth. The sound came again, not the quick rustle of an animal, not the flutter of wings. These were slow, deliberate footsteps. Crunch, pause, crunch. My brain scrambled for explanations. A deer, maybe? But deer don't walk with such rhythm. Each step was heavy, dragging slightly as if someone was pushing through undergrowth on purpose. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. My voice carried out into the night, swallowed by the trees. No answer, just more footsteps. They were closer now. My throat tightened. I reached for the hunting knife resting by the log, my hand trembling. That's when a voice finally broke the silence. "Mind if I join you?" The words came from the darkness, low and casual, like we were old friends. My blood ran cold. The firelight revealed a tall man stepping into the clearing. His clothes were dirty, but not like a hiker's. There was no backpack, no gear, no water bottle. His hands were empty. And his smile wasn't right. It stretched across his face, but didn't touch his eyes. Before I could say anything, he lowered himself onto a log across from me, leaning forward as though he owned the fire. His eyes darted constantly, first at me, then at the knife clutched in my hand. "Quiet night," he muttered. "Perfect place to disappear." My heart hammered. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound was thin, weak. Didn't think anyone else was out here. He didn't answer right away, just stared into the flames, grinning faintly. The silence stretched so long I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You know how many people go missing in these woods? I gripped the knife tighter. Something about the way he said it calm. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the air. I glanced at it for half a second, and when I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. No sound of footsteps, no movement of branches, no fading crunch of leaves. One second he was there, the next he wasn't. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, straining to hear anything in the forest. Every rustle of leaves sent waves of panic through me. The silence was heavier than ever, pressing against my chest. I didn't sleep that night. I fed the fire constantly, terrified of letting the flames die. My back stayed pressed against the tent, knife clutched tight in my hand. Every whisper of wind sounded like a breath behind me. When the first pale streaks of daylight finally pushed through the trees, I didn't waste a second. I packed my gear in record time, stuffing everything into my bag without care. My eyes scanned the forest constantly, convinced that at any second he would step back into view. The hike down felt endless. Every shadow between the trees looked like a figure. Every snapped twig sent my pulse into overdrive. By the time the ranger station came into view, I was staggering with exhaustion and relief. Inside, I forced myself to recount what had happened, pretending I wasn't trembling as I spoke. The ranger's face hardened the longer I talked, his eyes narrowing. When I finished, he leaned across the desk and said quietly, almost carefully, "No one has registered a trip in that sector for weeks. You were the only one out there." The words landed heavy, hollow, impossible to shake. If he was telling the truth, then who had sat across from my fire that night? I still don't know. Maybe it was my mind breaking under fatigue. Maybe it was something far stranger. But I can still hear the echo of his voice, see that too wide smile etched behind my eyelids. And I've kept my promise to myself. I haven't camped alone since. I don't think I ever will again. Two summers ago, my cousin Daniel and I hiked deep into the forest, looking for total isolation. After a long day, we found a clearing by a stream that seemed untouched until we noticed the campsite. 2 tents stood open, sleeping bags unrolled inside. A cooler leaked around spoiled food, and a pot of burnt scraps sat by the fire pit. It looked like the campers had stepped away for a moment and never returned. It was as if the campers had gotten up for a moment, then simply never came back. "Hello?" Daniel called, his voice cutting into the silence. No answer. We waited, expecting someone to appear from the woods, but no one came. Hours passed. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Against my better judgment, we decided to set up our own tent nearby. The abandoned gear felt like a bad omen, but the sun was sinking, and we were too far in to hike back out. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought Daniel was talking in his sleep, but when I listened closely, I realized the voices were coming from outside. Not just one voice, many. Dozens, overlapping, hushed but frantic, like a crowd murmuring in the dark. I shook Daniel awake. He sat up, listening, eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" he mouthed. The whispers grew louder. We unzipped the tent as quietly as we could, our flashlights ready. My stomach dropped when I saw them. Figures, dozens of them. They stood in the abandoned campsite, motionless, their outlines faint in the pale moonlight. They weren't solid, more like shadows given shape. None of them moved, but I knew they were watching us. Their heads tilted in unison, as if they could feel our fear. "Run," Daniel whispered. We didn't bother with our gear. We bolted into the woods, crashing through branches, our lights bouncing wildly. The whispers followed us, rising, echoing through the trees. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually we stumbled onto a faint trail and didn't stop until we reached our car just as the sun was coming up. Back at the ranger station, we told the man on duty what we'd seen and described the abandoned campsite. His expression shifted from curiosity to something close to dread. "That area hasn't been open for years," he said quietly. "There haven't been any registered campers out there." We insisted, told him about the tents, the cooler, the fire pit. Reluctantly, he agreed to check. We led him back that afternoon, though every step made my chest tighten with unease. When we reached the clearing, my heart nearly stopped. The campsite was gone. No tents, no cooler, no sleeping bags. Only an overgrown patch of grass and a fire pit choked with cold ash, as though no one had camped there in decades. Daniel and I froze, words caught in our throats. The ranger shifted uneasily, his brow furrowed before he finally muttered, almost to himself, "You shouldn't come back here." I don't know what we saw, whether it was a glimpse of the past or the last moments of those who vanished. Maybe we were seconds from joining them. But whenever I think of camping, I hear those whispers in the trees, and I know the forest never forgets.